welcome, Adam. So lovely to have you on this series. We've been just so looking forward to having you here and to talk about all the big cat work you've been doing across the world. For viewers, Adam is somebody who's worked on many species all over the world, and I'm going to hand it over to him because he's the best person to tell you his story. Adam.
Thank you, Latika, and thank you for having me. I look forward to sharing my story with you. I thought that I would talk to you today essentially about my life with big cats and linking the journey that I've been on with ecotourism and the value of ecotourism and the conservation for these big cats literally around the world. So going right back to the start, because it is quite an exciting journey. It may be a little bit longer than normal, but there's a lot to say. This is where it all started for me. I was 5 years old. I was cast into a television series called Bush School. It was in 1990. It was way before the days of reality TV show and social media. And essentially I was one of 6 kids put into the Kruger National Park almost as a test to see whether you could educate children in a different style, in a different way, rather than just doing mathematics and science and all that kind of stuff. Actually throw these kids into the bush, immerse them in the African wildlife, and then teach them as you go. So there's a couple of little fun photos that I've managed to dig out courtesy of my mom. And you can see there we dealt with things from camouflage to reptiles to birds to everything you could possibly think about. And that really did shape who I would become. When I was 18, I decided I wanted to really get back into the wild, and I went across to South America. This photograph is taken in Yasuni National Park in Ecuador, where I was a volunteer for a number of months. My specialty there was bird life, and I was literally put in charge of clearing tracks through the rainforest to help with bird surveys. Here's a cool photo. This is me, again, aged 18, at the base of a fig tree, looking all very young. Interestingly, I have those same Swarovski binoculars. They've been with me since the very start. In fact, they've been with me since I was 16 years old, and I've used them every single day. Anyway, so from my start, my foundations at Bush School, compounded with the Ecuador stint where I was doing all this volunteer work, I decided I needed to get a more formal education. So I returned back to South Africa, back to my home country, and I went to Stellenbosch University, where I enrolled in conservation ecology, and 4 years later got my honors in conservation ecology, specializing in the relationship in promoting wilderness areas, in park management, in how to take land and how to restore land and how to get people coming in, so kind of an ecotourism concept to it. From there, I decided that I wanted to go to what I believe is one of the best lodges in South Africa. The place of you that they may well all be familiar with is a place called Londolozi. I kind of started it all down in the Sabi Sand, so in the western side of the Kruger National Park. And from Londolozi, I started essentially my guiding career. This is one of the most intensive guiding courses that you can do. And here's just a number of fun photos of us camping out in the bush, doing what we do, uniting as a team every single day, doing practicals, doing theories, doing walking, doing driving, and ultimately it led to me becoming a guide. This is probably one of my first days on the job. For me, guiding is the most enriching of experiences because you get to share stories, you get to tell people, you get to educate people. As a scientist, I started seeing that my issue was that I really struggled with how scientists communicate. Through journals, through written documents, through graphs, through things that were quite complicated for your everyday person to understand. And so through guiding, I was able to take the science and actually tell it in a different way. And so I started becoming more and more of a storyteller. And I used my experiences in the guiding world to tell those stories. And it was an incredible, incredible time. I absolutely loved it. Loved the good and the bad and the ugly. Spent 5 years working at Londolozi, where most people specialize in leopards there, specialize in seeing the leopards and photographing the leopards. I enjoyed them, but my focus started to shift towards lions. This lioness here on the right, she became my all-time favorite. I used to spend every single moment of every single day going out, trying to find her, trying to unravel and tell her story. And I did it largely because I was with this man here. This is Soli Mflongo, one of my dearest friends, one of the most incredible humans that I've ever spent time with. We came from such contrasting backgrounds. This was not long after apartheid, the end of apartheid had happened. And to have two of us from such different houses, from different cultures, from different places, but with the same passion was truly, truly wonderful. And so Soli and I developed this relationship over a period of about 3 years, where ultimately we would track. We would get off the car, we would walk, we'd find tracks, pug marks, and we would walk and walk and walk. And usually our intention was on finding lions, trying to work out what the lions were going to do, trying to predict what they were going to do, and trying to show our guests these lions so they could photograph them. Became very, very important to me. He was from a coalition of 4 males that came into the area, and really we started to bond in a way that is quite incredible. So between the 4 of them and that single female, I started to write and document, and that's what actually got my photography going. So at first I was photographing merely to document interactions, to try and make it so that when I went back home every day I could write notes and I would have photographs to remember. It all, however, I started to realize I'm always in these really good positions. I'm in these really great places where I could take these photographs. And so I started to work on my photography. And ultimately, this all led to the publication of my first book, The Lions of Londolozi, which we decided to use a very unusual platform. We actually started on the iPad. The reason being that we wanted it to be very, very image heavy, video heavy, and graphic heavy. So we had a lot of maps, interactive maps. You could see how the coalition was moving. You could see how the pride dynamics were changing. And essentially this documented a pride for the last 18 years. So I went back, I gathered information, I kind of put these pieces together, and I had 18 years of a lion pride's life documented. So it was truly a wonderful, wonderful thing to be a part of. After that, I decided that it was time for me to get further afield, to try a different cat, and I had an amazing phone call from a gentleman from Brazil, and he told me that I had to head to the Pantanal. So here, this is a very, very typical scene of flying over the Pantanal. This is one of the biggest wetlands in the world. It's a little bit similar in some ways to Okavango Delta in Botswana, but in other ways it is completely different. At times it is completely flooded, and at other times in the year, it's almost like a desert. It dries out tremendously. So I flew across to Brazil, and I went to this ranch, private 60,000 hectare cattle ranch, and I started driving and driving and driving, trying to work out what was going on in this ecosystem. The owner of the cattle ranch was a very forward-thinking man. He was well aware of the fact that jaguars were all over his land. He didn't see them, but he saw the remnants of them. He saw the carcasses of them, and not the carcasses of the jaguars, the carcasses of the cattle, because he was a cattle rancher. And he reckoned that he was losing about $800 worth of cattle every single day. And so he basically put out the objective, the challenge, saying, if you can prove that tourism can produce $800 a day or more, then I'm not going to shoot the jaguars. I'm going to let the jaguars be, let them enjoy, and live in harmony with the jaguars. The heads of cattle living on this land with a lot of jaguars all together and all trying to work out how this could work. Here's a photograph here of a very typical scene. This is most Sunday mornings in the Pantanal, where the cowboys are trying, they're practicing their technique, they're lassoing, and they're catching the cattle. This is what it looks like from the air. Again, this is the kind of the headquarters of the ranch that I was based on. These setups are truly, truly incredible. The numbers of cattle that they move around these farms. Obviously, they're all going for beef, but they were losing a lot of cattle at the teeth of the jaguar. Jaguars have a very, very bad reputation in the Pantanal for killing a lot of cows. So we put together a team. This is a rough picture here of a couple of us. You've got some bright yellow cars that were intentionally made to look like jaguars, but to get people talking, to try and change this whole idea, this misnomer that jaguars are bad and that they're only going to cattle, and to rather try and educate people that they're actually eating whatever is available on the land. And if you remove all the indigenous wildlife, then of course they've got no option but to go for the cattle. But if you work with them, if you allow space on your ranch for indigenous wildlife to thrive, then they're rather going to kill those. So we assembled a team put together by a gentleman there in white called Mario. Mario was an ex-racing car driver. He decided to retire quite early, and instead of spending his money in America racing cars, expensive fast cars, he was going to come back to his homeland of Brazil and pour his money into a real conservation project of trying to habituate jaguars. My role was we should start to look out for and how we should view and how we could get tourists to this area. So here you've got the car again, the funny yellow car, and it almost looks like a scene out of Jurassic Park. The road network is hugely important when trying to find cats, whether it be tigers, leopards, lions, cheetah, whatever it may be. You've got to learn the land. So the first thing I did is I just walked. As I had done, spent a lot of time back in Londolozi. In the Pantanal here, I walked and walked and walked. And essentially, you're looking for tracks. You're looking for areas where these cats are scent marking. You're looking for where they're scratching trees. For those permanent water bodies. Good network you can put in place that'll increase your chances of bumping into these cats. And we started to build this grid pattern that would allow us to see, okay, the tracks have gone over this road. Let's check the next road that is parallel in a couple of 100 meters and check the tracks across there, and so on and so forth, until eventually we could isolate a jaguar into a block, and then from there we could start to try and find it within that block. So a road network is so fundamentally important towards finding a cat. Pantanal landscape in which to drive a car. Some of the forests are impenetrable and a lot of the land is completely waterlogged. And so we decided to opt for collaring. Now there's a lot of people who will be for and a lot of people who will be against the collaring process. We use these collars on specific jaguars for a number of different reasons to habituate a jaguar without actually ever seeing it. So to explain, we'd find a jaguar, we'd obviously have to catch the jaguar using a lasso method. We'd dart the jaguar and then put the collar on. Then we were able to find out where she was or where he was. And this would allow us to use through the process of telemetry. Now, telemetry or GPS points, we can use either, but we could essentially work out where this jaguar was. And even if it was not used to cars, we would know where to park the vehicle so that jaguar knew that there was a car nearby. And through a process of repetition, of just constantly being around that jaguar, eventually that jaguar starts to relax. This is what those collars allows you. It allows data like this. Really, really useful data on seeing how animals, how cats, how these jaguars are using a landscape. It allows you to look at diet, it allows you to look at movement, times of movement, den sites, and also it allows you to see which jaguars you should focus on. So our issue was that we had a 60,000 hectare cattle ranch, completely protected. The owner was not shooting the jaguars. He had removed all the dogs. There was no issues with those jaguars. However, the neighbors initially were not so kind of giving. They were very, very concerned about the project. So what we decided to do is we were going to collar as many jaguars as we could, use the GPS data, and then only concentrate on habituating jaguars that were found completely with that protected area. So if we went and caught a male jaguar and we found that he spent 50% of his time on a neighboring property, we decided that whenever we saw that jaguar, we were intentionally not going to view it. So it was a very, very good method for us to use to try and work out which jaguars were the ones to start to concentrate on. And really incredible work was able to get thanks to it. Here's a little camera trap footage that I'm going to play for you. 3 young jaguars feeding on a cow, on a carcass. Now, whenever they managed to kill a cow, which was quite regularly, we would secure the carcass. You can see on the bottom right there's a little rope. So if you look here towards the bottom right, you'll see that the carcass has a rope on it. And that is because traditionally what would happen in this area is jaguars would have been hunted. And so once the jaguar has killed the cow, they need to drag that kill into the bushes. They need to conceal, they need to hide that kill away from humans. So what they would do is they would do that all the time. So by tying it down, by securing it, eventually we started to teach these animals that they didn't need to move the cattle. They could go there, they could feed on the carcass in place. And then we used the key, which was to start the slow process of habituation by parking cars far away, and ever so little time we would then go closer and closer and closer. This could take months. With individuals, it could take weeks. With some, it could never happen. You've literally got to identify the individual jaguar. You've got to park away, probably 200, even 300 meters away at first. And then perhaps next week, 250 meters, then 200 meters, then 150 meters, and so on and so forth, until after a few months of hard work and a lot of patience, you keep parking 20, 30 meters away from a cat, which is a truly remarkable experience. And that is what brings the tourists in, the ability to photograph a jaguar in the wild. And so that money that was coming in from the tourism dollar was definitely enough to pay that $800 a day to encourage the landowner to not shoot his jaguars. And what really is interesting is we knew that this process was working when after a year or so, the neighbors started asking questions about how we were doing it and what we were doing. And for us, the ultimate compliment was going to be when people started trying to copy us. When the farms around us stopped shooting jaguars and started to view jaguars, then we knew we were doing well. We also decided to try something completely new. We took trackers from South Africa, from the Kruger National Park area, and we took them to the Pantanal. They had never even left their city, let alone South Africa, let alone got on a big Boeing 747 and flown across the ocean. They'd never gone to South America, they'd never gone anywhere. So I went back, collected these 2 guys, Richard and Andreas, flew them to Brazil, gave them a little introduction to Brazil, and then we literally dropped them into the Pantanal. They didn't know what a jaguar looked like. We told them to track a leopard-like looking cat and do what they could for a month, and let's see. It was incredibly hard and at the same time phenomenally challenging and rewarding. And I've got a little video that I prepared on one of our very, very first track and finds that I would love to show you.
So we've been on the trail of a male jaguar for about the last hour and a half or so. Been tracking through some very, very difficult conditions. Lost the trail a couple of times, but the guys have done very, very well and managed to get back onto the tracks within literally a matter of minutes. Seen lots of cool stuff along the way, lots of capuchin monkeys, some very good bird life, and we do believe we're getting closer. We've come across twice now where he's scent marked against bushes and shrubs, and the second time it was actually so fresh that you could really smell it. And what was interesting was a very, very different smell from what we're used to with leopards. But we're going to continue, we're going to keep going. We believe we're getting closer to this male jaguar.
We've been following this male jaguar since 6:30 this morning, and he walked a long distance zigzagging. So now, as you can see down here, that's where he was scratching and...
Some truly remarkable tracking. We're still on the trail, 2 hours now. Absolutely incredible what these guys are doing. Look at what we're going through at the moment. Luckily there's a nice sandy path for the time being, but wow, it's thick. We just found him. Not exactly sure who it was, but maybe the big male in the area. We were probably about 25, 30 meters at one stage.
Yeah.
Middle of the day.
That's no sir.
So you could see there the delight on our faces. If I remember, that was the very first time that we ever tracked and found a jaguar on foot, and the track was almost 3 hours long. Pretty ironic that the moment that we found the jaguar, an airplane flew over, but it was in the middle of the day, and it was one of the most remarkable things I'd ever been a part of. These two gentlemen, they walked hours and hours and hours every single day. Ultimately, though, it was too difficult. The difference between the Pantanal and a South African kind of context is that when these jaguars could hear that they were being followed, they would head for water. They're not scared of water, and they swim a lot, and they swim very confidently, and they would just swim away from us. And obviously, tracking in water is absolutely impossible. Here's a little photograph of them playing around, following a giant anteater. These two guys had the time of a lifetime, and I wish that really we had filmed this, because it would have made the most incredible documentary of taking two Shangaan people, so from the heart of the Kruger National Park, and throwing them into the Pantanal and watching what they did. There's another funny video which basically shows you the difficulties, and that's the ticks.
This is the ticks. You can see all over my trouser here. We've been tracking a female jaguar into the long grasses, as you can see here. All over our body we're covered with ticks. This is the worst ticks I've ever seen in my life. There's millions and millions of ticks in here.
So yeah, so it was the ticks, it was the leeches, it was the bromeliads sticking into your feet, it was a whole lot of things acting against us. But ultimately, the small team carried on again and again and again and again every single day, and slowly but surely, through a process of habituation, we started to see these jaguars. And I'm very, very proud to say that now, a few years later, almost every single day a jaguar is seen on this cattle ranch, is photographed by people. Guests are paying a lot of money to go and stay there. It's private land. It isn't like the northern Pantanal where you view jaguars from a boat in a rather crowded environment. This is completely private. You go on game drives like you do in Africa. You go out at night, you go out during the day, and it's a working cattle ranch, and it is proof that you can have cattle and jaguars living together. It really was a truly remarkable time for me as well to venture out and explore a different cat. And the highlight, without a doubt, was the moment when I was out by myself and managed to come across a jaguar den site. Completely by chance, I'd heard a little noise. I went in there. It was the most dangerous and the most stupid thing I've ever done. But looking back, it was the most spectacular thing that I could ever have hoped to see in my life as a big cat biologist, and even someone who just wants to appreciate wildlife. I took a few photos, very, very few, because I was shit scared, to put it in blunt terms. I was worried about when the mother would return. There were 3 cubs in there. The footage ultimately managed to get to the BBC, and David Attenborough himself saw the footage. It was the first time wild jaguar cubs had ever been seen at this age, and he insisted on narrating that documentary, which was produced by the BBC, called Jaguar. So that kind of was the pinnacle for me, was finding these jaguar cubs. Wonderful for me is that they're still alive. Well, at least this one in the frontier is still doing very well today. So once I'd wrapped up my time in Brazil, I got a phone call from Anjali and Jaisal Singh in India. And that is when I moved across to Rajasthan, to Jawai, to an incredibly different, contrasting environment, but one of the most spectacular ecosystems that I've ever had the fortune of going to. Many of you watching might have been to Jawai, might have heard about Jawai, and it's because of these guys, the rock leopards. Essentially, Jawai is home to a population of leopards that behave in ways that are completely new, especially from an African context. And so I was brought on board. As I was back in Brazil, I was brought on board to come around to here to help them set up a camp My job had nothing to do with the camp at all. It's to do with the experiences and with the actual leopards. So I started off by walking. Yet again, I climbed every single hill in that area, and I had a little map, and I started jotting down little notes. Every time I saw a track, I would write down where I saw it, and I slowly but surely built this map that needed to be made in my mind. And that was the map that ultimately I went on to create. The rocks of Jawai are out of this world. And even just from a scenic point of view, it really is a place that I would encourage all of you to go to. I carried a lot of camera traps around with me. I put them into little caves, and I started to work out that there was a lot of kind of habitual behavior going on with these leopards. These leopards were living on these isolated granite kopjes, these hills, during the daytime, and then at nighttime they were coming off these hills. They were going into these farmlands, and they were largely hunting goats and sheep and domestic livestock. Then as soon as the sun started to rise, they knew they had to get back onto the hills. They retreated back onto the hills into these caves, and I started to learn about these caves. I started to learn which caves were active, what times they would come out, and how they were using this landscape. Now, most people are completely amazed at this ecosystem because there's nothing indigenous for them to eat. They literally are living on dogs, sheep, and goats. And you would think that the local people would retaliate. But in this area, there is a special bond, a unique relationship between the leopard and between the people. And these people, the Rabari, are absolutely magnificent in their outlook on life. And I thoroughly enjoyed spending time with them, both the men and the women, photographing them, walking with them. I even went as far as literally going and herding goats with them. I would dress up with them because I decided that at the time that I was the first foreigner living in this area. It's midway between Udaipur and Jodhpur. First foreigner there, I decided that I really needed to embed myself in this culture to truly understand the people. And once I understood the people, I would be able to learn about these leopards. And once I learned about this specific population of leopards, I would be able to help us create a lodge that the world would want to come and see. And again, through ecotourism, we knew that if we could provide jobs, employment, education, healthcare, everything that should come along with ecotourism, if we could provide that, then the locals would thrive. And because the locals would thrive, the leopard population would continue to be protected, even though this was essentially a non-protected area. It wasn't inside a national park. The leopards here have this amazing relationship, and to be able to see them with temples, with priests, coming out of temples, coming out of caves, was truly, truly remarkable. And to get images like that really is what set this place up, because there is nowhere else in the world that you can get images like this. A completely non-confrontational relationship between humans and leopards. Here's a nice photo of a hand pump. Every morning the guys would go and pump their water, and the leopards would drink what was left. This is the little village, and you can see there, it's a bad photo, but I've circled in red there, a leopard sitting there. There's the music, there's the arti, there's the kind of the sunrise chorus going on, the bells, the chimes, the prayers, and the leopard sits there happily. And so to conduct game drives in this experience, in this situation, was remarkable. It was completely different. I had to take a lot of mental power to kind of switch off from the Africa situation where you're looking for these intact environments of pristine nature, and now rather given a game drive experience in an area that is definitely not pristine and has definitely been impacted upon humans. But at the same time, it was so wonderful to show that humans and nature can coexist. And not just coexist, but thrive. The leopards here were doing really, really well. There were unique situations. We started seeing big groups of leopards. The record I saw on one drive was 13. The record I saw in one little group was 7. So here in this specific photo that I pulled up, there's 5. And what you started to see were these multi-generational families of leopards living together. And ultimately, we built a magnificent camp. A camp that people would travel from all over the world to come and stay at, and a camp that invested a lot of its time, money, resources back into the local area, into the local people, and into the local wildlife. And this is owned by the Sujan family, Anjali and Jaisal Singh, they've done an incredible job. And if you can, I highly, highly advise you heading that way. We also managed to put together a Discovery Channel documentary to help to show the world this place. That many people wouldn't be able to travel there, but it was worth having the story being told. And for me, one of the highlights was to get involved in this culture and to watch them and to share with them and to grow with them. It was very, very special. Whilst I was in India, I couldn't help but go and spend a bit of time with tigers. Most of my time with tigers has been spent in Ranthambore, a little bit in Kana, but mainly in Ranthambore, and where I've done a lot of work with the guiding team, trying to uplift, trying to teach, trying to share experiences on guiding from an African perspective, from a South American perspective, and trying to understand what the wants and the needs of guests are across the world. From there, I decided to head back to Africa and to one of the most fantastic conservation projects that I could ever have been hoped to be involved in. And that sits in Rwanda. Rwanda is a country, a very small country in East Africa, which has really seen the light and has given a lot back in its last 25, 30 years to regrowing from a very, very difficult past. There's a park on the eastern side of Rwanda called Akagera. It's a long, thin park with a lake on the eastern side, and east of that is Tanzania. Not many people know about Akagera. Most people associate Rwanda with gorillas. So the government decided that they needed to work on this. They needed to try and get people to stay in the country for longer because the tourism dollars are limited when you're going in to see gorillas. They go in there, you see the gorillas and you leave. How to keep people there? Well, you have to invest in your landscapes. So what they wanted to do was they wanted to reintroduce the lion, reintroduce the king of Rwanda. The king used to be there, the lions used to be there, but the genocide forced everyone to leave the country, and when people came back from the genocide, rumors when it was finished, they were scared to settle in Kigali, so they settled in the outskirts of the country. They obviously had their cattle, and the cattle were being killed by lions, so they retaliated and they killed all the lions off, and the lions went extinct in Rwanda. And the decision was made to reintroduce them. So I was part of a team working for Africa Parks to move 7 lions, 5 females and 2 males from different parks in South Africa. They would ultimately be the source population for a rejuvenating lion population, which I'm proud to say now is really, really thriving. This is one of my favorite photos ever because there is so much meaning in here. This is one of the rangers, and down at the bottom there are some lion tracks. This ranger had been in Akagera for, I believe, was just under 10 years as a ranger, literally anti-poaching ranger. And he would never have seen a lion because they did not exist during his time. Suddenly we put lions back, we put them in a boma, we opened the gates, the boma, the lions ran, and suddenly this guy had a whole different cat, a whole different animal to have to worry about while he was working. And so a lot of my time was spent with these guys, trying to show them, trying to help them how to behave when they see a lion on foot, and how to work in a situation where there are lions now living in the wild. My job, you couldn't have written a more bizarre kind of job description. It was to live with the lions. It was to keep them safe. It was to prevent them escaping the park and prevent people retaliating, prevent people being killed, and basically keep the peace while these lions started to settle down. And whilst that was happening, I was to host film crews. So we lived in a car. We literally lived in this car, and we followed these 7 lions for months. The vegetation, exquisite, very, very difficult area to get around because there are no roads at all. But really, you can't ask for anything better than to travel around following lions day and night. They were all collared for safety and security reasons, obviously, so we used telemetry, which should make it easier, but often they would go into places where the reception wouldn't work. And there you can see in the background the beautiful Akagera National Park. It really is stunning. And this whole deal was done because the Rwandan government knew that they had to provide the area with the big 5. Subsequent to this, they have since reintroduced rhino as well. Wilderness safaris have put in a lodge here now. high-end lodge, so people are starting to come, and people are starting to link Rwanda with the gorillas and with Akagera to see the lion and the rhinos. So Rwanda is being very, very clever in its way that it's creating a destination, and it's using wildlife to do that. So the wildlife is creating money, and they are then creating a better, thriving population of people, happier environment, and just an all-around better place to be. This is a picture very, very typical of what my life was like during that period. I would sleep in that car, eat in that car, bathe in that car, and obviously host these film crews that would come in to document these lions, because it literally was one of the first new populations of lions in that area. And there's a lovely photo of a lioness just to finish off. Those collars would all ultimately fall off or be removed, and the lions would regenerate themselves. And now I think we're sitting at about 25 lions from the initial 7. And so again, that is really, really working very well. From there, I had a bit of a crisis, and I decided that I was going so feral and so rogue and so wild that I needed to see humans again. And so I moved to Windsor. I moved to England. The most completely bizarre landscape for me to find myself in, having spent so many years surrounded by big cats. I was suddenly in one of the most first world countries in the world. What's interesting for me is walking around, seeing the numbers of cat sculptures in England. There's, without a doubt, there's more cat sculptures in London than there are lions left in the whole wild. But yeah, my time in England was short, was sweet. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I got to eat in some fancy pubs and enjoy some first world life. But from there, I decided I needed to head back into the wilderness. And so I went to Peru. So here is Cusco. I didn't base myself in Cusco. I based myself in Manu National Park. So deep down in the Amazon, one of the most unexplored national parks left in the world. And this was, again, a breathtaking moment for me. That's a photo there that pretty much sums up what Manu National Park is about. It is thick, thick jungle, and it is so impenetrable that it is what has protected it largely from very large scale issues, human issues such as logging, poaching. They are there. You're going to see a photo coming up shortly of logging, but this rainforest is relatively safe for the time being because of its inaccessibility. It is very, very difficult to get to. I was part of a project here to try and work out if there was any potential for tourism in this portion of Manu National Park. Essentially, I was doing a tourism ability study, and my focus was on trying to use the experiences of animals such as jaguar, spider monkeys, and so on and so forth, and the bird life, to try and work out what it was, what would be the carrot that would lure tourists in, because that tourist dollar, again, would make it easier for them to protect the longevity of this forest. This is special. So back on the left, you've seen that photograph at the beginning of this presentation. That was when I was 18 years old. Not much of my life has changed. I have been very privileged to have gone to some of the most wild places and worked on some of the coolest projects in the world. And I still am working on cool projects. So there's a photo on the right there, taken a few years ago, of me under a very similar fig tree in the rainforest. My time in Manu basically meant that I spent a lot of time exploring local communities, seeing how the locals lived, discussing with them what they wanted, what they were short of, what they needed, doing kind of questionnaires, trying to unravel what tourism was about, trying to work out what life was like in the rainforest, trying to see what infrastructure would need to be built for a camp. I managed to do cool things such as going up into trees, being parts of projects that were putting camera traps up in the tops of trees to try and work out if there were corridors in these big branches, to try and work out where animals were moving and what they were feeding on. Of course, there are difficulties. In the middle of the rainforest, middle of nowhere, you come across scenes like this, where guys have been logging. There is still rampant trading of humans, people. There's very bad drugs. Interesting, a lot of the airstrips, the very makeshift airstrips in this part of South America, are completely dominated by the drug cartels. And one of the biggest issues that we had in trying to uncover how tourism could work was knowing that we were going to have to be dealing with these cartels. And ultimately, that started becoming too difficult. What there is there, though, is incredible bird life. Truly, truly remarkable. And although we never really succeeded with the jaguar viewing, I used to try everything from boats to walking to hides to climbing in trees to whatever you can think of. I really, really struggled with the jaguars because it was just too dense. And also, I knew in the back of my head, if you wanted to see jaguars, you would rather go to the Pantanal, which is much more open, much more photogenic in terms of an area to take photos of. So we needed to start to specialize in what this area was good at, and that was bird life. And the macaws in that area are truly, truly magic. However, it was too difficult for me, truth be told. I had a number of different difficult encounters, the worst of which was a very unpleasant moment where I hit a piece of bamboo with a machete and the bamboo ricocheted into my eye, embedded itself in my eye, and I was only able to extract it some 4 hours later. I can see, but I still have very bloodshot right eye thanks to this moment. But I'm incredibly lucky that I got out of this situation. It was truly one of those moments that you see films of using my Leatherman to cut the bamboo off so I could try and hold myself together so I could get to the camp, so I could get to a boat, so I could get to someone who could pull this piece of bamboo out of my eye. And the blood, it was just horrific. I had that, I got some pretty bad infections, and eventually I decided that humans weren't built for living for long periods of time in Manu National Park, in the Amazon rainforest as a whole. And in a way, that's a blessing, because that is what is going to keep the Amazon alive, is that it is such a difficult environment to live in. So from there, I had to take stock of where I was going in life in terms of my personal health. And so I decided that I still wanted nature, but I wanted to go back to a bit of a landscape that was more familiar to me. And so I moved to Kenya. I moved to the Maasai Mara. This photograph is taken in the Mara Triangle, the Mara Conservancy, so the western side of the Maasai Mara, looking north along the Olololo Escarpment. It is one of the most beautiful areas in Kenya. Kenya is one of the most beautiful countries in Africa. And which is where I currently am based, I'm based at a beautiful lodge called Angama. It's on the very top of the escarpment. It's looking down. You can see the escarpment in the distance there. And this is, without a doubt, one of the most luxurious high-end lodges that there is anywhere in the world. And I like the ability to interact with people coming from all over the world, to educate them, to share with them, to talk with them, but also the fact that we're working on a scale that we can really start to give back. This camp is built on the ethos of doing work with conservation, with education, and with healthcare. And we take the money that guests are spending on the lodge, and we are able to work with communities in this area. And those communities are the Maasai. Some of the most beautiful men I've ever seen, beautiful men and women. The way that they jump, the rhythm that they've got, their skin tones, they're built like athletes, the way that they jump, the way that they run. They truly are incredible people. And this is where I've been based for the last 2.5 years. My role here is very multifaceted. I do a lot of stuff with the Conservancy themselves. I do a lot of marketing for the lodge. I do a lot of photography, but I do a lot of work with the cats. The most obvious is the lions. I'm always out there looking for lions, always trying to document the lions, always trying to look at new ways to photograph lions. This is one of my favorites at the moment. I'm always trying to work out who's mating with who's related to who. And so we're slowly but surely putting together this identification guide. And believe it or not, in the Mara Conservancy, which is only about 500 square kilometers, I have seen 52 different male lions in the last 2.5 years. There is a tremendous population of male lions working through this area. Females also doing really well. And so it is fascinating for me to come to grips with this lion population. I'm also working with the Conservancy and with the lodge to try and build a leopard identification guide, to try and work out which leopards are which, and to try and get fundamental basics such as numbers. The moment we think that there could be as many as 30 leopards using this area, this triangle area, but it's very, very challenging, very difficult to come to grips with these leopards because they are very secretive, elusive, and they don't often like to be seen. This is a typical example of what I do, documenting the territories, trying to work out where they are, and just trying to keep tabs of who's who. A photograph here of a cheetah. Cheetahs are doing well, not as well as I think you might think they're doing. And I've poured a lot of my energy this year into a project called Remembering Cheetahs. It's actually part of a greater thing called Remembering Wildlife. Some of you may be familiar with this work. A lady called Margot Raggett, she's been putting it together for the last 5 years. Essentially, she picks a species. She started with elephants, then rhinos, apes, lions, and this year it's cheetahs. She picks a species, she approaches the world's top 60, 70 photographers, and she asks for their single favorite cheetah image, or lion image, or elephant image, or whatever it may be. Those images get put into a book, those books get sold, and every single cent that gets made from those books goes into the conservation projects of those species. And this photograph here of the cheetah is, I'm very proud to say, is the photo that will be featured in October when Remembering Cheetahs is released later this year. My work here has shifted more and more towards the storytelling component. The Maasai Mara is obviously very established in terms of tourism, and so I'm looking at ways to try and tell fantastic stories and to try and increase guest experiences. So I do a lot of photographic classes, a lot of workshops, a lot of seminars, a lot of in-camp kind of tuition. We built a photographic studio that I run, and we also give back to the Conservancy. A lot of time with the anti-poaching unit, with the sniffer dog unit, telling stories, visually capturing these stories, making videos. I make a 1-minute video almost every single day that we put out on the Ngama social media. So it's a really cool way to stay up to touch with what's happening in the Maasai Mara. We try and uncover the stories. Here's some hippo meat poachers. Try and work on what we can do, how we can give back, and what the Maasai Mara needs in order to continue. The most exciting thing that I'm that I'm engaged with at the moment, and that I'll finish with now, is a photographic competition. It's called the Greatest Maasai Mara Photographer of the Year, and this was built as a way for people to give back, for photographers who come to the Maasai Mara to give back to the Mara community. You enter your photograph, $20 entry. It entitles you to a chance to win the ultimate prize, which is the $10,000 reward. But it also means that your money goes to one of 6 conservation groups that we donate money to. So I thought that I would finish off with the 2019 highlights roll, explosive imagery of what's going on, but I would encourage you to look at the Greatest Maasai Mara Photographer of the Year. And if you've been to the Mara in the last 12 months, it's a very good way to enter and give back to the community. So to finish off, here is the Greatest Maasai Mara. So, my own personal journey, I communicate it most through Adam Bannister Wildlife on Instagram, currently based at Ngama, so doing a lot of work with them. And yeah, it's been an incredible ride, and I'm sure it will continue to be long into the future.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adam. That was amazing. It helped us all spellbound. It's just sort of totally captured the reason why people like you and I are doing what we do. It's magic. And we love being outdoors. And I think that's what I keep telling people, that if you want to do this sort of work, it's a personal passion. It's not for anything else other than this is what you want to do.
100%. You have to be completely in it.
Yeah. Okay, so just to go back to a lot of the stuff that you were saying, we've heard about, the problems that you had medically. We've heard of issues with the physical aspects of tracking. Did you ever come into aspects of human-wildlife conflict apart from the jaguars being killed on the ranches? What are the issues that you face, for instance, now in the Mara?
Yeah, so now the Mara is in many ways in a difficult space. What we're seeing a lot of, and because I spend so much time with the lions, we're seeing the sub-adult males, which are, as you'll know, when they get to that age where they start to want to find their roar and their mane is becoming a little bit thicker and they're wanting to find their own space, they're moving out, and essentially they're leaving the park and they're moving into these community lands. And the Maasai are herdsmen. They've got their sheep and their goats and their cattle, and if a lion attacks the cow, it takes a very, very understanding man for him not to want to go back and retaliate. And so in my time of being here in the last 2.5 years, I've heard more than enough stories of lions being speared, of leopards being speared. One of the things that we do is we help with a mitigation kind of compensation scheme. It's a difficult one, though. It's very open to the potential abuse. Around the world, compensation schemes are questionable in some degree. But yes, in the Mara, that is the big worry for us. And I would say that the thing that the Mara needs the most is it needs its boundaries expanded, and it needs a bit of a buffer zone around it. My situation in India was unusual because in that area there was no conflict. I mean, there was conflict in that the leopards were eating the goats and the sheep, but there was no retaliation. And I think that is what made that such a special place, that Jawai kind of bubble that I know you're going to hear more about when you talk to Jaisal Singh about. But yeah.
Okay, so I come from a background of having spent about 30 years in central India, and it's a huge problem between wildlife and human beings. I mean, you have crop predation, you have human wildlife both getting injured or killed, of course cattle compensation things. And I was just talking with Dr. Kriti Karant, and she's been working on this project called Wild Seve. You might want to have a look at that. It's a very successful program down south, where they're dealing with just the issue of cattle compensation and yeah, so it's a really interesting thing, which is great because you hear, from all of you, and bits of the jigsaw puzzle start coming together and allows us to learn from each other.
There's an interesting one that I've heard about. You obviously know Amy Dickman.
Yes.
But she's got this program that I've been reading more about, is that she basically has this camera trap program where she'll give community members camera traps, and then they get points. They get different points for different species that are found on those camera traps. And then once they accumulate a certain number of points, they can then earn certain things. And I think that is possibly something that we could start to look at replicating here along the top of the escarpment. So if you have a lion in your camera trap, then that's 10 points, or a leopard is 15 points, or whatever it may be. And then once you get to a certain number, we give you a water filtration system, or we put in a classroom, or whatever it may be. I think we need to start getting creative with these ways, with these means.
That's amazing. That's a great idea. Okay, but thank you so much.
relocating big cats is really not a good solution, to be honest, because if you move these big cats, I mean, there is evidence, concrete evidence with radio telemetry and microchipping that has confirmed that big cats will come back. Even if it's 200-300 kilometers, they will try their best to come back